Hi, everybody. I hope everything is going well with everybody out there. And I have a couple of questions. We're getting a little short again. And I guess the reason why I ask questions is it's so that I can touch on things that actually are valued by you, not only valuable in terms of what I'm thinking. And it also is helpful for you to consider things. I mean, when you do have answers that I might give, you consider them and reconsider them and see if they fit, see if it makes some sense to you. Anyway, here's a question from Carl Martin from Nashville. And she says, I wonder how it is that the day of Pentecost happened. Do you think energy found the time appropriate for a display? Or was it only visible to certain perceptive ones who chose to reveal it? Jesus did some public healings as well. She goes on. There have been other displays of miraculous situations. For example, the Virgin Mary appearing not only to 3 Portuguese children, but to a crowd in the early 1900s. I recommend that you read Ray Stanford's book on the appearance at Fatima. It's interesting. It might be helpful a little bit to understand, slightly different than maybe a more conservative understanding of what that might be. Is such an attempt to turn people to a spiritual bend? Seems energy is often quiet, not seen. Why is there sometimes something flashy? Is it to do with the big boost? All of that's possible. Now, remember, this is from my perspective. And there are other people who have different ways of looking at things. First of all, the day of Pentecost, in my understanding, from how I look at things, was not very much to do with anything but attempting to get the disciples to be able to handle more energy moving through them than they actually could have in relationship to their emotional or mental disposition and their physical structure. But there's one underlying feature there that I think is missed by most people, in that it was also to show that higher state level engagements with these planes could occur for the purpose of strongly implying that normal, natural folk like fishermen and tax collectors and lawyers and anyone could be affected by those higher states if there was somebody around that could be able to be, I'll say it out loud, almost like a conduit with respect to, in those reference points, to God. And God being defined as all kinds of things from a whole bunch of different points of view. So trying to understand it as a flow of energy coming into them to stretch them and soften their heart, their emotional disposition, and how they saw the world, and the way they were thinking. To such a degree as to allow them to be able to handle a flow expressing through them for the purpose of helping others. Helping others in those days was pretty well clearly defined uh, in the ministry of the Christian background as healing. And as a matter of fact, 10 chances to 1, it was pretty well all that could be literally understood. It had to be something fairly physical so that people could say, oh, gee, that really happened. And others could say, that doesn't mean anything. It's only physical stuff. So there's all kinds of renderings of how people think this universality should be, and it's defined by many even today. Uh, many people do the same thing. If you don't have this belief, it's really not, God. And others would say, if you don't have that belief, it's really not God. It's truly not a high enough state because our state is better than others. As human beings, we are prone to do this kind of thinking because we are so competitive in relationship to what we believe we think might be true or not true. And this is the nature of the human structure even today. We have a ways to go in our understanding. In the meantime, there's no possible way that a person can actually define exactly what that concept is, what that ideal is, that universality is, except through a kind of experiential thrust. And on the day of Pentecost, it was definitely experiential from what we would garner from the New Testament. And it was of service. So the concept would be of divine service for those who would need help. And the idea of that flow helping others at the level of what some may call soul, to help their soul to be helped to grow internally. And others would say, no such thing as that. It's only higher self, another aspect of a self that relates to the self that's here. I'm not really trying to debate that. I'm just saying this is how we do things here. In that time, they did them in a very specific way, in my opinion, to show us that potential was there in every human being, everyone, to engage with a higher state. And that was, in 2,000 years ago, plus, it was about the only thing that we could really basically understand as a human being. If you saw something occur, you implied it must have occurred because you saw it, or if you didn't like the idea of something happening, then you called it trickery, and you tried to get rid of the trickery because it made your idea not very good. This is natural. It happens today in 2021 in every way of looking at society. When you're dealing with something, you like to have your idea more important than somebody else's. It's just the way it happens. And it's not, it's where we are. It's not a judgment, it's a realization. So in those times, they may not have been able to understand the possibility that an impact from a higher state might be helpful. There's not a lot that we know about those particular disciples, except what they have been purported to write. And some of you out there who are historians, you'll find out you have already begun to realize that much of the New Testament was, no offense to anybody, taken out of a certain rendering of information written prior to the time that these expressions of that time were written. They took from other people because perhaps the writing skill wasn't great, or perhaps they took only the things that they thought might be reasonable. But some of these were written much after the time when the actual disciples had passed away. But you have to dig to find that out, and others had dug in those directions. It doesn't mean there isn't validity in what you're reading, but it will be valid based on the times. That would be natural. What would be written now by anyone who is writing anything is based on the bias of these particular times. We're more focused in theory on two areas: emotion. We can't say we're not focused on the physical body, but we also are focused on thinking, attempting to think and make sense of in a particular rationale based on our biases. This is natural. So there's no negation in that. It's just what happens at some future time, perhaps, when some of this prophetic engagement relative to the day of Pentecost begins to occur with some people, where they're born into our world, able to handle more energy so that that can be transmitted to others. And this, you've heard a few stories that have been told about some things like that. Then those folks are going to be quiet about this because we still are a part of the biases. We still have a good number of biases that we find very real in the way we think and express. How those things can't happen even now because it just can't be true, because they're not walking on water and they're not doing the things that were done before. This kind of thing is natural to have that kind of way of thinking. And it's part of the learning that we process, that we go through when we're young folk, and later on when we're a part of a group of people who think this way versus another way. And that is what we do here. We haven't the perception to acknowledge the perception of a soul structure or a higher self structure. And you know that I relate that to the chakras, or the Zephyrat, or whatever else you want to call them, valves, where energy comes into us in such a manner as to allow whatever you believe, you love in your biases to be kept there with that energy, that loving energy that comes in. You keep them there, those biases, until one day you say, oh, I wonder if there's something broader, because the effect of keeping them there is always stimulating the personality's version of value. So there is self-interest in all of this. And this is a natural place for us because we are trained to have it naturally so that we can feel less vulnerable in our lives. We haven't reached the stage where that flow itself helps us to be less vulnerable. Most of us are human beings, and that's it. That's what we are. And many of us think we're superior human beings. We're not. We're just human beings. But there's gradients, right? Hear those words? Gradients, levels of value and importance. You couldn't blame anyone who's really truly able at a higher level for not saying anything about the reality that they live in, because it will always be diminished by those who don't live in it, because it is a natural thing to do on our planet, in our species. It's also natural to want to learn and grow and perhaps even broaden out our capacity to be able to be helpful just by being there, so the energy can operate through for a particular purpose that relates directly to enabling others, as in the day of Pentecost, to some degree, some minor degree, so that you can handle more energy of a loving kind that relates to enabling an individual to be able to see beyond what they can see. And I'm not talking about these, I'm talking about perceive. This is often, that word is replaced by seeing, and those who can see something are still, whatever they see, they assess through their own biases, because it's the nature of us to do so. That's our training. And it's difficult to shift that training unless we slowly begin to experience something slightly different and slowly move to the point where we can understand broader, because it's all right with us to understand broader. Not because we're forced to. And that is a dilemma for us. Because sociologically, we lean on what the multitude might think, which is normal for us, or in some way what we can rebuff against to allow ourselves to feel comforted by having an idea that is called valuable by us. So there are many options, and none of them seem to be negative at all. So that maybe that could be helpful in our attempt to understand some of these very unusual things. So I would hesitate, but will say that I think that his purpose was to bring attention to the possibilities of each one in relationship to the potential that that inner aspect or soul or higher self might be able to be a part of in relationship to then beginning to recognize the reality of a flow, something different than you could recognize before. He did this with the disciples, I think, I could be wrong, to allow us to at least consider the possibility that, as he seemed to imply, that all of us have a potential to engage beyond what we currently, no matter what timeline it is, currently know as a reality of life, of an internal life, of a so-called one could say divine life, because the experience is so unusual and so wondrous, and sometimes very scary for us, because if this does occur slowly, then you get to see you, and you get to see you clearly. And we're not used to that. We're used to reacting and engaging habitually in a way that happens to be right. This is not a devaluation of our species. It's a vision of how we're growing. And I think that's wondrous, little by little. So we have to grow reasonably slowly so that we can allow ourselves to be okay with seeing beyond what we currently believe, even at this second, this moment. And I think that's wondrous. The potential is wondrous. At the same time, we have to deal with, if you have that experience, you don't think you're superhuman or super wonderful or super divine. No matter what level you engage, you still have more to grow. But that's not how we think. We use a very considerable, let's say, bare bones relationship with at this level to define what we come up with in terms of others or ourselves. And there's fierce competition. And after the day of Pentecost, you never hear about the disciples literally there competing with each other. You don't hear about that because they didn't. It wasn't relevant. But there was a competition between Paul and Peter, but you can read that by looking at Acts and taking a good close look at the relationship that the disciples had with their journeys. But it's not obvious, but it's not well hidden either. Okay, let's see if I've missed anything here. Okay. Very interesting that Carol brings up the idea of a display. In fact, it was kind of a display. When you look at it, it was just before or around the time of a horrendous war, 1914 to 18, and then an upcoming war that would come up in the 40s, 1939 to 1945, roughly. And there was preparation going on all the time with respect to the possibility of another war. These were terrible, terrible things. They were horrible. There was a very interesting thing that happened there when these three children were involved. Actually, if you read that book, Carol, if you can find it, you can look it up online and see if it still is in print. It's by Ray Stanford. You'll find that some had full awareness, if I remember correctly, of the occurrence. Others could hear it, couldn't see it, and others weren't aware of it happening, but were in awe of a sensation, or they were aware of the fact that something was going on, but they couldn't all perceive it. And out of that came the idea, of course, there were the prophecies, and the idea of if there is a tremendous level of growing, see, we have to make sense of something, then a third of the people would be able to perceive and know what was going on, an engagement with the higher state. Part of them would only be able to hear that engagement or perceive it in some manner that wasn't fully conscious. And the other knew something was going on, could almost be aware of it, but couldn't. There's always these metaphorical things, these fable-oriented, these mythical-oriented. Even though this did happen, it still follows the same alignment where you're looking at trying to figure out what this means, what that means. And it happened in Europe where there would be the wars that would occur and where there might be a possibility of something even more drastic occur. And there were prophecies involved with these things. And you can try and see if you can find out what the prophecies were online, possibly. But it was always linked to determining that those who could survive these kinds of things should attempt not to war, not to be engaged with these things, because warnings would come that if you don't sit down and not want to be the greatest nation, not want to be the greatest person, not want to be this, not want to be that, then things would start to change. But we interpret whatever we interpret based on what we want or what we want to be true. And this is not a negative thing. It's what we do. Our dialogue is always that way. So I would suggest that it wasn't a display. It was an engagement in the hope in a Christian country, in the hope that it would be taken as a sign. People still look for these things, and something to remind us of the need to be more generous, kind, respectful of others in a broader manner than we can bring our biases to do so. And this is a kind way to speak about it. But desperation was there because the future would be something pretty gruesome if we continued how we were going, one could say. This has always been understood in the East as the fact that two ways, that each one of us human beings have the potential to becoming aligned with a higher state. Second thing, if alignment with a higher state, truly an alignment with a higher state, would tend to be less competitive because there would be a bonding between those who were linked with the higher state because they knew it was there every single day. But prior to that moment, there's competition. And they knew that too, between yogis, between people who were trying to be more important than the next person because they had a certain level of development. This is not new in our world at all. This is the norm in our world. It still exists in the West just as much as the East. So there's no difference. We just pull different stories, different biases, different defenses, but the application is still there. And our vulnerability to it is profound, even in tiny little things that occur. Someone goes out and plays baseball and hits the ball harder and farther than anybody else. There's a kind of resentment and a competition. Oh, if they can do it, somebody else can do it. Let's do that. Let's get that. Let's get that person. They can't hit it this kind of ball. They can't hit it that kind of ball. It's a game. But there's intrigue in the game. One team versus another team. Thankfully, we have that kind of thing to wear off some of these kind of attitudes that we have. Same as in politics. No offense to any politician. But politics is an exaggeration of how you function with others every day. Softening that down is not what we're taught. Being respectful to others in where they are, as opposed to how important you are, is not normal in our society. If we're honest about it. So being honest about it isn't something you really want to do. But now what happens if you have awareness? You begin to have more and more awareness, and you see you doing that. Do you try to hide from that? Your awareness is increasing. You can't hide from it. You see it every day. You're trained to judge it because you do that with others. It's training. It's not negative. It's just not helping you to understand that you'll have energy come in to help you do that until you start shifting something, and then it will come over to that shift. So growing slowly is of great value because you maintain that growth. Well, you also maintain the other part, but you'll see it better. And as long as you're not too resentful about yourself and you're growing, you should be okay. Be kind, respectful. It's really hard to do that because we have a strange thing. We tend to listen to others, and then we protect how we think things should be, and we resent somebody coming up with something that's different because, in a kind of a way, that means we have to consider the option. It's only a consideration, but it doesn't mean it's perfect either. It's a different option. And learning comes from applying different options and considering not their worth, but where they can fit. Because we're used to training. We're well trained in finding the unworth of something or the worth of something in some cases. But that's not a negative thing. It's what we believe we have to do to feel comfortable inside of ourselves about where we are. And it happens to all of us. You can catch it after it happened. And if you do, that's an increased awareness. Don't negate it. Say, I saw that. Say, okay, how can I do that slightly different? You got to do that. No one can do that for you. Because the energy, if you meditate and use some of these exercises, the energy will get stronger coming in. And it will be stronger in love, whatever we love. And that love, if you love yourself and how your biases are, your biases will get stronger. It's an act of loving. It is showing you love. This is what you love. You love doing this. You love doing that. Makes you feel better. And that's not a negative statement. That's an honest statement. This is why there are not many enlightened people around, meaning they can handle an expression of flow quite strongly and notice the love in it. Sometimes you'll have experiences where you cannot do anything but notice the love in it. That's to reassure you that there is love in there and it's related to loving. It's a hard concept to make sense of, but understanding that really does help. For example, if you have a relationship with any religious background or mantras or prayers that you say them with reverence. And more reverence comes in. You say them if you have an idea that you really, truly believe in, more understanding or even belief comes in. Until, if there's something beyond that, you start noticing not a flaw in it, something beyond just a little bit. So that place is being there to help you get beyond what you really believe has to be true. Our natural focus in our very vulnerable world that we are in and have been, it's been increased, this vulnerability in the last couple of years, is that to protect you, to see your vulnerability more, it shows up more. And therefore you have a reaction to that. Slow the reaction down the best you possibly can. Because that love is going to your reaction. Because you like to do that. And it is trying to help you to see that you can allow yourself to soften it. And the only way you can do that is to listen to you telling you to be more gentle with yourself. Because you all love yourself. And there isn't any doubt about that. Whoever would ever listen to these kind of talks, the same is true for them. Those who won't listen, don't even allow that to be a possibility, they love themselves relative to how they move and take a place and make decisions based on how they believe. They maintain that every single day of their lives. And they do this for a wonderful, wonderful purpose so that they can begin to see and understand that others do the same thing. It's not competitive. But others may not know they do that. If you're brought up in a certain manner, you will maintain that manner until you allow yourself to care in a different way than you currently care for you. And it's not quite that simplistic, as you all know. You will find out quick enough that you don't want to shift or change very much of anything because it's what you're used to and it makes you feel more comfortable. There's no negation in that. And whether you like to shift or change it, just chronologically, your aging will get you to want to shift it. And you will shift it if unconsciously Yes. Consciously? Yes. You'll feel uncomfortable with how you were last 20 years ago, 10 years ago. But not with everything. Just some things. Those that you would prefer not to continue with. Go slow with it. Yes, you may change something that you feel that you don't want to do anymore and feel quite content about that yourself. It's the same for all of us. But there are things you don't even see because you can't. Doesn't mean you're blind. It means it's not come up in the vision that you have of you. Believe you me, other people have other visions of you than you do. And they are seen by their biases. A good percentage of the time, it's not real for them. But don't tell them that because they don't know it. Because they're reasserting themselves so they feel comfortable inside themselves about being able to see something that they believe must be there. And often it's a reflection of themselves. And they don't understand that. And don't want to, quite frankly, sometimes. But don't you dare judge them for it. Because you have them too, and so does everybody else. In the old traditions, they often talked about, and I think I did mention this at a seminar, that we were really engaged with maintaining how we are most of the time. And I think that's primarily true. But many of us are attempting to adapt to seeing more and wondering whether that is what we want to continue or not. And realize how difficult it is not to continue. That is becoming more aware. Not treating yourself badly, but trying to understand you and recognize some of these reflexes that are there to protect you as well as annoying others. You'll see better. And sometimes you'll even do them to annoy others. And other times you can't stop laughing at it because you don't any longer agree with how it comes out of you. Because that's just not where you are anymore. Have to leave room for that to happen so that you're not beating yourself up, because it's not. You seeing it is not meant to be there so you can beat yourself up. It's meant to help you recognize that you have broadened your perception, your inner perception, where that flow of energy will be perceived by you, literally perceived, not imagined, not say, okay, that's what the center is, and now my bias tells me then it must be like this, and people should be like this and like that and like this. That's not what I'm talking about. That happens all the time. Is it bad? No, I don't think so. I think it's a precursor to perception. When perception actually occurs, it will shock you. You'll wonder what it is and why it is there. And it's not the way you think it should be. So why is it there? And what's that about? Because that would be normal. Don't be afraid, too, for those of you who are clairvoyant. That clairvoyance sometimes is there for you to be able to perceive something that you couldn't perceive before, and now you can. and it might even be there from birth, yet some kinds of clairvoyance can be there from birth. A deeper kind can happen where you lose the peripheral clairvoyance. Not that that's a good thing, bad thing. It's just that happens because you are now meant to soften down your importance because of what you could perceive before. This is a shocker too, because I've heard many people say, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me because I used to be able to do this and now I can't do this anymore. And it's not real. But we don't have a lot of footage with this, a lot of information about it. But what can happen is you lose it because you're learning how to realize that there's deeper levels of engagement for purposes that are broader than becoming important or valuable. And this is very difficult for us to understand because we're not trained that way. So I hope that helps a tiny little bit, Carol, in your questions, because it is about energy. The Pentecost is about energy. And Fatima was about energy, not as a display, as a prophecy, as a warning. These are prophecies. You don't open them before this date because they will be relevant then. And maybe you'll understand why, that kind of thing. There's another question, and I'm not sure I have time to answer it. Let me just see. This one is from Christina in the Ottawa area, Perth area. If you have paused to consider a thought or action rather than reacting, I think we're still talking about the same thing or something similar with the commentary I had after, of course. But finally still agree with your initial reaction. Is this considered growing?
Can you repeat that?
And I'll repeat it. If you have paused to consider a thought or action rather than reacting, you pause, but finally still agree with your initial reaction, is this considered growing? Wow. In other words, is just the act of pausing rather than reacting a sign of growth? Even if you agree with your initial reaction, chances are you're going to agree with your initial reaction, but you may not have as much fervor in it. And yes, I would agree, Christina, the very act of pausing, if you can do that in relationship to a reaction, is a huge step in allowing yourself to reconsider. And if you still agree with what you believe you should have been doing before the pause, by all means do it. That's you that's doing it. And over a period of time, you may find other options or not. You're not looking for a perfect answer here. This is often a misunderstanding. What you are looking for is a broader recognition or cognition, a consideration, at least for a moment, to understand what's going on the other side of the street with the other individual if you're reacting to this, or what's going on in relationship to whatever it is that you're reacting to. Growth increases perception, remember. I wrote a couple of words here. And with practice, you can notice more energy inside of you during that pause. just for a second. And keep practicing the idea of being aware above your head and behind you, because that helps you to move away just for a few seconds, away from wherever you are in your own expressions when you're living life. But I just reiterated here, I'm looking to see if I left something out that might be helpful. So it tends to broaden the perception, and you become more conscious of how you function. Next step is not judging what you see, just allowing yourself to see how you function. Not good, not bad, not right, not wrong, just, okay, so this is how I make sense of things. Eventually, it will help you to notice other things different than the you. You have a natural reaction to circumstances, all the natural reactions to circumstances you happen to be in under various contexts. Also, though, those pauses will help you perceive energy coming into you from others. You know, those two people that I have to put up in some seminars. And I do that because this is consistent. If you engage with another person or an idea that they have, you will have responses to a belief system that they have. You'll also find that sometimes you'll agree and sometimes you won't. Agreement is not the deal. You don't have to agree. Consideration, seeing how that could broaden out something that you already believe, or seeing if you have a willingness to allow that to occur, will make it a little easier for you to reconsider some things that you cannot reconsider currently. And you'll be reconsidering it not because somebody that you know says it, but because there's something inside that you're perceiving about where that might take you or might not take you from your biases. These things happen. And as we get past about 25 or 30, we tend to slow down our openings and increase our need to be more valued. A bit speculative there, a little generalization, but it seems to be something in that order. So you can see if you can see that in your engagement. And it opens the mind as well. And ultimately, if someone asks more about that, I'll try and explain that a little deeper. Otherwise, let me see if there's anything else here. Not knowing the difference between. I think I've covered most of that, Christina. If you have anything else, we can talk about that at any time. Thank you very much for listening. And we are just about out of questions now. And any coming in would be really appreciated. And remember, we have a seminar on December the 4th. And I hope everyone has a good evening. And we're going to meditate right now. Take care of yourself, please. So we just begin to do the balancing and grounding, and have a good evening.